Welcome to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham. In April, in the build-up to the election, we had one of the leaders of what was called one of the new parties then, now a party well established in South Africa, and we discussed the forthcoming elections, and the man is back again, and that is Songezo Zibi. Songezo, welcome back to the State of the Nation.
Thank you very much for having me.
I know you've been a busy guy since the election.
Listen, I will never laugh at MPs who sleep in Parliament again. I've dozed off a couple of times.
So don't get taken by those videos of MPs. They do actually, many of them earn their money. But let's first, before we get to Parliament, where you now occupy a very, very important role, but let's just look back at the election.
Yes.
There was a lot of, in the old terms, column inches given to parties like Rise. Unfortunately, always in the sentence were a number of similar parties.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
I don't want to mention that because I thought it was always disrespectful, and I think it hurt in actual fact. If it was just one of you, it would have been much better. But looking back, what did you think of your return from the electorate?
Look, we were disappointed with the eventual outcome of the election, but we also understood why when we examined the evidence before. I think I might have said in one of our conversations that we're paying a lot of focus to areas where the ANC has been traditionally strong.
Yes.
Right? And that started weakening over time because we felt the ANC brand, the credible version of the ANC's politics in terms of a sort of a community level development, personal development, etc., still resonates with people. One of the big factors intervening is because by the end of last year, it became exactly the same terrain MKP was playing on. And they were a much more embedded, a kind of a political vehicle.
Yeah, they were a bit of a known quantity with Jacob Zuma.
Known quantity, their people had been in those communities as well and that kind of thing. And we began to see some of our activists basically switching back away from Rise back into that universe. I think that from the evidence that we've seen, had MKP not been on the scene, we'd have had more MPs in Parliament than we do. So that's one thing. The second and last thing is that we should have campaigned a lot more in the suburbs. We should have, right? And we didn't. Because of the choice that we had made initially. It's not to say we didn't want those votes, we did, but there are so many people, especially now, and we are speaking at the beginning of December, who say, I didn't quite know much about you guys, and if I had heard, I would have voted for you, and that sort of thing. And that's an opportunity missed. Of course, we had the problem of name recognition, because you need people to know who you are in order for them to trust you. So we've got a long way to go, but there's some lessons learned.
But now let's talk about those activists that at one point perhaps sympathetic to Rise and then moved across to MK. It's a bit of a big difference politically and sort of ideologically, isn't it? To go from what you're standing for, which is kind of a modernist party, that understands the modern world, to a party that seemingly wants to go back to 1860.
No, look, I mean, I don't think it's an ideological issue. It's a whole variety of factors. I mentioned the name recognition issue. If you put Jacob Zuma and some other locally famous person next to a Songezo Zibi who has not been active in Parliament, just the way people understand track record and credibility kind of shifts in that sense. Secondly, elections are also about trust more than anything. I don't actually think that ideology matters as much for over 95% of voters as people think. People want somebody they can trust. The ANC and EFF can do a policy switch and represent a different politics. People who like Julius and so on will not hate him.
Yes.
They will go with him because it's essentially about trust. So what I'm trying to say is I'm not surprised by the switch at all, because fundamentally we are also proposing to be solving the same problems. You need to get your kids educated. We need to make sure there's food security in the home, kids get nutritious food, the clinics in the community work, etc., etc., etc. And that's a message that other political parties were with more familiar people.
Yeah. Look, I have to say, the number of times I've been told by people saying, don't worry, they'd never do what they say they're going to do. And we hear that in America with people that voted for Donald Trump saying, he's not as crazy as he talks. Well, I'm always a little bit nervous.
Never a good idea to want to find out.
Yeah. So just sort of cleaning up that election, what did you make of everybody talks about the emergence of MK, but it's really a story of the ANC decline. I mean, it's quite a hectic story. As somebody that sort of had a front row seat to it, what did you make of the outcomes of the election?
I've been reflecting on the election still, and the U.S. election, it has been incredibly helpful in thinking further about what's going on. Of course, the ANC is declining, so that much is clear. The numbers speak for themselves, and also the number of voters who are not turning up to vote instead of choosing the ANC or another points to a similar story. So that's true. But at the same time, there are some patterns. I mean, all the incumbents in across all the countries that were incumbents during COVID were punished at the polls. You saw that in Botswana. You see that in the US, you've seen that in Europe, you saw that in India and so on, where Narendra Modi was running a juggernaut and, they just made it and so on. So there is something shifting. I think just like the global financial crisis, COVID has shifted something in the political psyche of voters across the world. And South Africa is no different. I think what we're seeing is the different degrees to which various political parties are able to respond. Final point I want to make is that the thoughtful political parties that apply themselves to a set of ideas didn't do so well. The EFF had a 270-something odd page manifesto. Now, disagree or whatever with their policies. The point is they applied themselves, they put their intentions on paper, and they made sure they are detailed. And you know what? The EFF declined. You're like, I'm sure they're asking themselves, what more do we have to do? Yeah. And then these guys who didn't have a manifesto,
they wrote it on the back.
Blow us out of the water.
Yeah.
How does that happen?
Yeah.
Or the Patriotic Alliance, which had a very simple message. You were not white enough during apartheid. You're not black enough post-1994. And all these immigrants must go. I'm not saying that's a sum total of their policy positions, but very simple message. Very close, no thick manifesto, blowout performance. Right, so something's in the political water.
Yeah, I suppose, and if one compares the financial crisis of 2008 to COVID, 2008 the problem was sort of didn't hit Main Street perhaps as hard as it could have, but COVID, I suppose, politicians used up a lot of political capital in selling a narrative that was proven to be. That a lot of people had problems with. So it's something that's going to live with us for a generation, I think.
I think so.
But now, okay, so the elections come and go. Government of National Unity gets formed. And there was a question mark as to whether you guys were in or not. Yeah. Initially, you were sort of a maybe by the sounds of things. Yeah. And became one of the last yeses, as I recall. Am I correct?
Yeah, in fact, we were, the second last, I think. Yeah, I think we're the second last. There was a process, Mike, that we went on. So when we initially engaged with the ANC, we said priority one is to constitute parliament so that we can elect a speaker, deputy speaker, and a president. The president can then form a government and parliament is able to do its work. One of the things I mentioned in our discussions with the ANC was the simple fact of appropriation bills, which had always passed when the ANC had a majority. With the ANC at 40%, Mike, you can't take that for granted. Right? So get parliament to work first, and then secondly, we talk about what role we play post the election of a speaker, deputy speaker, and a president. Now, one of the things we insisted on was that, look, we are not making ministerial positions a sort of the basis of this conversation. We were elected. We didn't expect to be in government, firstly, because we're a new political party. We always wanted to play a role in parliament. If the president wants to appoint any of us into a cabinet role, that would be his prerogative. But we're very happy to play a role in parliament. Strategically, that allows us to be in the GNU and hold it accountable at the same time, without the conflict of also being in the executive. And that's what we chose. And I think it's a choice that has been borne out by evidence that it was not a bad choice that we made.
Because as we were saying off air, it sure beats being sort of Deputy Minister of Science and Technology. Because let's face it, you've got one of the more important, if not the most important job outside of cabinet.
Yes.
And one would say even more important than many of the cabinet posts, and that is that you head up the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, SCOPA.
Yes.
Now, please explain to us very briefly what the work that SCOPA does.
Look, I think the people that watch this show, Mike, would understand. SCOPA is the audit committee of the whole government. Simple.
Yeah.
The Auditor General presents his or her findings, her audit outcomes, to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. We are the main client. There is a Standing Committee on the Auditor General, but that committee oversees the work of the Auditor General, the functioning, make sure that it meets its constitutional mandate, does its work, it's well equipped, etc., all of those things. We oversee not the Auditor General, but all the entities she audits, who number in the hundreds. That's our job. So we're the audit committee, and we report back to the full board, which is the National Assembly.
Right.
And our reports, the recommendations in our reports, are then adopted by the National Assembly, which means the executive is then obliged to consider and implement them.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I've always observed about SCOPA is that it's always headed often by somebody from one of the not major parties, and by God, the ANC always avoided anybody from the Democratic Alliance in that position. And so along with SCOPA is that we've had some really active people there that the government has steadfastly ignored.
Right.
That seems to be the one thing that one can say about SCOPA. You know, we had Klengwa there, we had Zungula there.
It was Thembagodi.
Thembagodi there. We've had a whole lot of people there, and it didn't matter how many alarm bells SCOPA seemed to have rung in the past, especially in the state capture years. The ANC, with their majority, steadfastly ignored them.
And they don't have the majority now.
And now they don't have the majority.
Which means the space is more open.
And have you been... So let's talk about some of the big findings that you've got. Obviously relatively new, but you've already been at work. What are some of the findings that you've had at SCOPA?
So, Mike, let me first say, it really is the best time to play this role as chair of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts when no party has a majority, either in the committee or the National Assembly, because we are forced to work together. And there are about 6 political parties represented in SCOPA in total, thereabouts, right? And one of my responsibilities as leader of the committee is to foster a collegial atmosphere. I must say, one of the most commendable things is that we've got an informal arrangement between us as committee members, that we're very easy on the barbs, the barbs between political parties. The work is important. Let's do this work. We'll do that in the National Assembly, in the circus, in the afternoon. But in the morning, when we're working, we focus on the work. And I must say that the members are really committed to that from all the political parties. The second thing, Mike, I have to say, there is a change in approach. And I'm going to the point about findings. There is a change in approach. And that change in approach is significant in this way. The audits are usually a year later, the audit outcomes. So the Auditor General, just a couple of weeks ago, presented her findings for 2023-2024. Acting now and then waiting for the next audit to see is one of the reasons government doesn't get held accountable properly. So we are moving to quarterly reports, half-yearly reports and this kind of thing, depending on which entity it is and what kind of trouble it is in, so that we can do live monitoring of those departments. And the Auditor General is supporting us with what they call live audits. So if we feel that after 3 or 4 months or 6 months, Department A is not doing what it's supposed to do, we can send in the Auditor General, we can send in the Special Investigating Unit to do the work now and not wait for the next audit. Now, when it comes to findings, I wouldn't call it findings, I would say observations, Mike. Our state-owned entities remain in big trouble, financially and also in terms of governance. Things are beginning to improve in some of them, but we are far from where we need to be. It's going to take years. It's very important for South Africans to understand. Secondly, the audit committees and the internal audit functions in departments and many entities are dysfunctional or ineffectual. That is why the Auditor General gets there and has to help the entity to even present credible financial statements. When you've got a functioning internal audit function, a finance function, and an audit committee, that shouldn't be so, right? So there are some of these things in the system that we're hoping to take an approach that is more systematic and hands-on in making sure that you begin to see improvements and not wait for each annual audit before you do something.
But now this dysfunction that you're talking about, be it in state-owned companies or political entities, municipalities, etc., is there anything that you can actually do about it? It's one thing to unearth the dysfunctionality. It's another thing to have somebody do something about it. Do you know what I mean? And you're doing this in the backdrop of Shamila Batoy refusing to prosecute anybody, getting rid of her prosecutor so that she couldn't prosecute. Is there any difference that you can make as head of SCOPA other than show this point, shine this light on the malfeasance?
So what I'd like to ask people to be patient with for a couple of months is that we tend to focus, I think, excessively on whether somebody will be fired or not.
We don't want people to be fired. We want them to go to jail.
No, sure. It doesn't matter. Even going to jail. Even going to jail. But let me give you an example about why the committee is adopting a systematic approach in order to help institutional recovery and accountability. For example, the Hawks lose about 35 investigators a month. Right. That investigator has been working on this case for 2 years, eventually leaves because they've got like 18 cases, under-resourced, underpaid, and so on. They get a job at Deloitte or whatever the case might be, and they're gone. New investigator comes, also getting paid a pittance. They have to start from scratch and go back to witnesses again and introduce themselves and take statements and that kind of thing. Now, one of the things I bring to the table is, unfortunately, Mike, I know, having worked in business, there are no shortcuts to institutional building. Part of what the committee then has to do is to make recommendations. I'm seeing the finance minister this week, for instance, one-on-one, and we'll talk about some of the resourcing issues right across the board, the procurement issues and that sort of thing. Because you need to build institutions to prevent these kind of outcomes from happening. So that's important, and we must not underestimate the value of that, Mike. What we are able to do, for instance, is if we feel or the evidence shows that there is a problem, let's say with procurement and contracting. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we signed a memorandum of understanding with the SIU. We're able to send in the SIU to conduct an investigation, to start recovering the money, even if people have not been arrested. If the SIU establishes that this cap was cost 150 rand when it should have been 75, the SIU is able to go now and recover the 75 rand and ask for this supplier to be blacklisted by the Treasury. And we have the Treasury coming in every 6 months to account for what has happened to all of the investigations. So what I'm trying to say, Mike, is there are so many thieves in the system that if we always choose to chase after them after they've stolen, we will never win the battle. So we must do both. We really have to do both. Do I want to wait until Shamila Batoy, as Advocate Shamila Batoy, the NDPP, has managed to prosecute someone 10 years down the line? Or do I want the state funds to be recovered next year, I'm going to go for the state funds to be recovered next year in the first instance. Because we can't wait 10 years.
But what do you make of the inertia in doing anything through the justice system?
So, Mike, let me say this. There is an element of inertia, but there is also a lot of work being done. Let me explain it in this way. The scale of the corruption is vast, Mike. What we are not seeing happening fast enough is the high-profile cases being prosecuted. We're not seeing that. They take too long. You see the small fish being prosecuted, hardly the big fish. Sometimes it's the big fish. And then there are problems with the case and it has to be withdrawn and that kind of thing. There is that. But 2 weeks ago, again, I had the SIU, the NPA, and the Hawks, and they did a presentation showing how many cases are under investigation, they're being prosecuted, and so on. And there is also a lot. They just don't give us a sense of justice because it's somebody at Mogalakwena municipality who's been arrested, right? And they've been prosecuted and they've been sent to prison. We don't count those because they don't solve the problem at the top. So I think we need to allocate the problem where it is, which is you see in the US people being committing a crime, being investigated, arrested, charged, sentenced, and coming out of prison before we even arrested people.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's madness. And that's unacceptable. I agree with you. But I'm always trying to be fair, Mike, and be factual. And I must tell you, I would say there's a lot of small fish cases or medium fish cases that get prosecuted.
Okay, it would just be nice to see one big fish. One would imagine if they put a normal person in there who wanted to make a difference, you would prosecute successfully just one high-profile
Mike, an
person.
example, Truta, the gentleman who was the VBS guy, did a plea bargain, went to prison, came out. His colleagues are still not on trial.
Yeah.
That's unacceptable.
Yeah.
It saps public confidence in the justice system. I completely accept.
And what is the sort of feeling in Parliament? Because, surely the ANC can't be blind to this. That they still keep on protecting, and influencing the justice system to the point that they're completely ineffective. So
we asked the National Director of Public Prosecutions whether she feels any political pressure in her role. And she said no. Right? She said no. And we ask this question all the time of various officials. We've asked the SIU, we've asked even auditors from the Auditor General's office, are you scared, are you worried, and this kind of thing. So she has said no. I think we have a combination of two things. The first is that the institutions that are supposed to do this, Mike, have actually really truly been destroyed. When I had the job when I was in the bank, I used to see, because of my role, many of the sensitive subpoenas that would arrive for information, because I might have, if it leaks and so on, the bank might do so, I would see that. I got to see both from the Hawks and from the Zondo Commission. The Zondo Commission subpoenas were infinitely better. And because the people were senior, they were a senior advocate who was doing that. You get a Section 205 from Constable so-and-so in Polokwane. And this person doesn't really know what to ask for. You understand? I want people to also understand that there are those institutional weaknesses too.
Yes.
I have a relative who's a senior state advocate who insists on reading the submissions of the junior advocates and editing them, because sometimes the language skills are so bad that what they put in the papers is not what they mean to say in court, and the case might be lost. These are real problems that we have in the system, and because saying you want to fix and build an institution sounds too long and boring, but Mike, I'm telling you, we will not put people away in prison as long as a Section 205 from that constable is as weak as it is.
But you mentioned that what you got from the Zondo Commission was infinitely better.
Infinitely better.
Okay, so therefore, here we sit, what is it now, coming up to 3 years after the conclusion of the Zondo Commission. and with that infinitely better paperwork, still nothing.
And by the way, because you know why? Do you know who's got to investigate the case?
Yeah.
It's still that guy.
Okay.
You see, it's still that person, because also the NPA or the Hawks can't pay more than 35,000 rand a month. Okay, so you can only get that person. This is the problem. So one of the things we are going to be advocating for as a committee is for special dispensations for certain types of forensic investigators, so that the NPA and the Hawks can retain them. You know, somebody was getting paid 35,000 rand by the Hawks, for instance, let's say. The SIU, because it works on a different salary dispensation, is able to offer them 80,000 rand. Which is one of the reasons the SIU would get so much more done.
What are they getting done?
So the SIU is able to recover billions from people. You remember that example I gave about people who overcharged tenders, inflated tenders and that sort of thing. The SIU, through the SIU tribunal, doesn't even wait for the court roll. It goes to the SIU tribunal and they're able to recover those assets. You remember the case of Hamilton Glove during COVID?
Yes, the car
They've
man.
taken all of those cars and that kind of thing already. Do you think if we were to wait for the trial to be concluded and so on, I mean,
And if it hadn't have happened on social media, nothing at all would have happened. But let's just talk about two things. And one is, do you have any input in the blatant sort of at least waste of taxpayer money? Things like deputy ministers. Do you just have to work according to what you're given?
So unfortunately, Mike, our constitution separates the powers of the different branches of government. The president has the sole prerogative to appoint cabinet. He or she may have 10 ministers, 20, 30. It's an area that parliament cannot interfere, right? As frustrating as it is, right? Similarly, the president cannot instruct parliament on what to say in a debate, right? And therefore how to vote and that kind of thing. This reality, though, is producing these kind of frustrations that I'm talking about.
Okay, so you talk about the collegiality within Parliament, and you're not the first person. I had Musi Maimane
within the committee.
within the committees.
Yes.
But even in general, it seems like the mood is relatively collegial, I think.
Relatively collegial. You have to be, because we also have to process the work of the South African people. If we at each other's throats all the time, we're never going to agree to anything. Get paralyzed.
As somebody that spent a career outside of Parliament, these sort of common sense issues that because you live in the world, you got stuck in traffic on your way here, you live in the real world, right? You didn't have blue lights that suddenly where you don't know there's a traffic job, or you don't know that the traffic light doesn't work, right? You and many of the newer members of Parliament live in the real world. Do you not speak to your fellow parliamentarians? Do they not agree that the level of frustration in the country is untenable? But yet they don't want to do anything about it, or what is the problem? Are they just protecting their own salaries?
I wouldn't say they don't want to do anything about it. I guess it's the kind of things they want to do in response. And the party political issues play a role in this. You know, I was in a meeting of Public Account Committee members from the provinces. And it was fascinating because there were members from the ANC, by the way, who were so frustrated at the corruption, the malfeasance, and so on. They were using much rougher language than I would use. There were also members from the same political party who were like seemingly wanting to be soft on things. So what I'm trying to say is, usually, it depends who you have in the committee and what they are inclined to do. The person who co-signed the agreement with the Special Investigating Unit with me is from the ANC. Because he's committed, he's got the support of the chief whip and so on, and he had no problem co-signing, an arrangement that is going to speed up accountability and so on. Would another MP maybe been reluctant, somebody who's not on the committee? It's possible that I would have had to persuade them and so on. The conversation between me and Skosana, because Mr. Skosana, that's his surname, was literally 3 minutes. Where I said to him, listen, we're renewing the MOU with the Special Investigating Unit tomorrow, and I'd like you to be the co-signatory because we need to demonstrate seriousness about these matters. He said, sure. That was that. And he signed, and it was public and so on. Now, I can't guarantee that another MP would have done the same thing. So usually the extent to which a committee is able to do and advance its work also has to do with the personalities therein.
Yeah. Now, quite clearly, just recently, the president showed his hand as a big supporter of corruption, right? When he did. He's now
with the minister.
With the minister of... Right, this isn't my opinion. It's fairly logical that the Minister of Justice, as she was then, Thembi Simelane, is terribly compromised. She's either the luckiest gambler and won the lottery 3 times, or she's a crook. That's kind of the simple reality, right? And instead of firing her when this all comes to light, he moves her, but not to some minor backwater...
to a big ministry.
To a big ministry, the ministry where most of the stealing gets done, right? Which is in the Ministry of Housing. Because we've got this obsession of building houses for people, and that's where you can steal the most. So he takes a corrupt minister, moves her from justice, where she's blocking the justice process, and puts her in housing, where she's most likely to steal. Can Parliament do anything about this?
So Parliament can, right? In other words, Parliament may pass a resolution or a vote of no confidence in the minister, I think, right? But ultimately the prerogative lies with the president again. The option that Parliament has is to vote the president out and collapse the government. That's the instrument that is available in the Constitution. If you want to get rid of 3 corrupt ministers and the president is refusing, then remove the president. That's unfortunately, and that's a very high bar because that takes a 2/3 majority.
Yes.
To do, which nobody has, and it would be incredibly difficult if the parties don't all cooperate. In any case, the ANC has 40%.
Yeah.
So they will always vote it down. So there are these things in the Constitution, Mike, which make it really difficult. I think, though, what we must not forget is that the reason the drafters of our Constitution made it compulsory for these things to be ventilated in public is so that voters may make informed political choices and punish certain political parties at the ballot. We don't have enough of that. We've got too many people who excuse corruption, re-elect people who are corrupt, and then look at the police and say, yeah, but why aren't you like, okay, you also voted them in, So, and I'm saying this to demonstrate, Mike, not to patronize anyone, to demonstrate that democracy needs everybody to show up.
Yes.
And sometimes the majority of citizens don't show up to make it politically inconvenient to retain a compromised minister.
I'm a bit concerned about that because that sort of goes down the realms of victim blaming. Do you know what I mean? That's a bit like saying her skirt was too short.
No, it's not.
What worries me is that the people of South Africa have voted. They have said, and let's face it, in South Africa, anybody could turn out to be corrupt tomorrow, right?
Yes.
It's that part we can never be sure of. And you're taking politicians at their word, but what you're hoping is that there's a parliamentary process that holds people to account, or people have enough moral rectitude to not support this kind of thing, and do whatever it takes.
No, Mike, please don't misunderstand me. So, on Saturday, I was on Sunday, I was with the active citizens movement in support of World Anti-Corruption Day, on the,
Or as we call it in South Africa, Sunday.
Right.
Okay.
So one of the points I made, and I make this point all the time, that democracy is a stokvel, right? Unfortunately, the very people that you have just elected, You need to sit on their necks. That's how the only way democracy works, Mike. Believe me. Anywhere in the world where citizens take their eye off the ball, democracy will fail. So all I implore them is, please, the reason I'm here is that I appreciate your activism. Yes. I wish more people would do what you're doing, because you need to make us uncomfortable all the time.
Yeah.
Because we need to know somebody's watching and they're going to cause trouble.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the system fails.
Yeah, I'm a little, once again, sorry, Songezo, you've got to say, within the realms of us giving up our jobs and doing nothing else but burning tires, you have the Zondo Commission, you have Outrage, you have platforms like this where we bring these things to light. It's not for lack of trying. Not everybody is going to be an activist. We saw that during apartheid. So, I'm saying it's a stretch to say the onus sits on the citizen and the voter. The voter voted. They moved massively.
Let me ask you this question, Mike.
Yes.
Do you want politicians in parliament making prosecutorial decisions? What do you think would happen then?
That would be terrible, and that's why the idea of the parliamentary democracy is terrible.
Do you know how many people I would like to indict tomorrow, Mike?
Okay.
You get me?
Yes.
So all I'm saying is that there are certain limitations introduced by the Constitution.
Yes.
I would love to fire Minister Simelane tomorrow. The Constitution doesn't allow Parliament to do that.
Yeah.
But it helps, and this is what I tell people, it helps when those of us who want these outcomes also have the ongoing and visible support of citizens, because it ensures that we are able to keep going. But when we are alone, because people are busy with something else, it's harder.
Now, I just want to ask you on a similar thing. The DA's shadow minister of justice, so I don't know what they're calling them now, that they're kind of in the government.
Yes.
Glynis Breitenbach introduced a member's bill, is that right, of basically re-establishing the Scorpions.
No, I support the principle. I've looked at it. I support.
Does that have a snowball chance in hell of getting through?
I think so, Mike. But the thing about politics is that you also have to think about how you accommodate other people in other things, because there's a collaboration. Let me make an example. There is a dispute about the Bella Act right now. Okay? Now, the DA has a position that they don't want to compromise on. And the rest of the other political parties are now unhappy and so, but they must go to hell. It becomes difficult, Mike.
Sorry, where do you stand on the bill?
No, we think the act should be implemented, Mike.
As written.
But the regulations that to interpret that legislation must be written in such a way that they prevent arbitrary and unreasonable action by the government. You can do that, right? And I know I'm digressing, but Mike, most of us black parents in the cities, we give away our language rights at school. Our kids get taught in English. Most of the teachers, even though the school is majority black, most of the teachers don't speak our languages. And we live with it as part of this compromise, because the 5% of kids who can't speak our languages also have to feel accommodated. We have to be careful about giving the impression that there are people in South Africa who need not compromise, while the majority compromise all the time. You understand? It's the same thing. It's the same.
I think you're playing with numbers, but
I am not.
I'm saying to prove the point. It's a playing with numbers issue.
No, I'm not. It's a principle. It's a principle, Mike.
Because it's easy to see where this goes to.
Where does it go?
Well, we know exactly what's behind the Bella Bill.
What is behind the Bella Bill?
The Bella Bill is to kill off government Afrikaans schools. Finished, right? That is baked in, and nothing's going to stop Panyaza Lesotho.
Mike, can I tell you, the only time on planet Earth,
yes,
the head of the central bank of a country has ever gone to protest outside their child's school was in South Africa on these kind of issues. Right? These are real issues that are live for us black people too.
Yeah.
But Mike, why is it okay for my kids not to be able to speak their language at school, but for other people there is to be no compromise at all, Mike, even if the demographic makeup of the neighborhood has changed?
Okay, but we've got a country in which 2023 one school was built.
It doesn't matter, Mike. That argument doesn't work. You can't say, okay, we'll build enough schools so that the black kids can go to black schools and the Afrikaans kids. No, Mike. We live together in this country. My kids, our home language is isiXhosa. We have accepted as a principle that we are A, in Gauteng.
Yes.
B, we are in a suburb where there are white kids, black kids, and so on. And our insistence on Xhosa is not going to be practical. So we accept the compromise that English becomes a medium in the school. We could insist, Mike. We could be difficult too. Why can't we do that? Do you see us blocking things? We don't. Why is it okay for black people? And this is, Mike, is what gives a nationalist demagogues the opportunity to say, you see, in this democracy, it's always you black people who have to compromise. There are people who don't have to compromise here. I think it's wrong.
Okay. So you agree with this, and it could lead to the dismissal of the Minister of Basic Education.
Mike, the Constitution compels Cabinet to act as a body. Cabinet approved the Bella Act. Imagine if Minister Simelane in the Department of Justice were to decide on her own which sections of the criminal code to implement. What discussion would you and I be having here?
Yeah.
You understand? Mike, I'm an institutionalist. We have to learn to negotiate these things. I agree. There is a real possibility that some people might lose their language rights. But you build that into the regulations.
But other people's language rights are stronger.
I'm
just saying.
What about mine? What about mine?
No, so we both have rights, and therefore, how do we play this game?
So the way to play this game in such a way
is the provincial premier decide.
No, the law doesn't say the provincial premier. The law says the school governing body and the education authorities in the province must work together to arrive at a language policy that is in the best.
What defines work together?
Mike, working together, by the way, is the same thing that we do where you understand that we have to accommodate each other in this rainbow nation in the same way that black parents all over the country repeatedly on a day-to-day make these compromises about their language rights and nobody raises a stink about it.
Yeah.
Mike, if we are people of principle, we have to say that black parents have similar rights. Yes. And you know what's going to happen then? We will go back to 1960 whatever.
I doubt it. But
we will, because you want to guarantee 100% that whoever speaks Xhosa goes to a Xhosa school, whoever speaks Zulu goes to a Zulu school, and so on. Then everybody is happy.
But what are you suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is that write the regulations in such a way that government officials cannot make arbitrary and unreasonable.
So in a school, where let's just say a formerly Afrikaans school, and 51% of the parents, I presume the parents or somebody, I don't know, some god over there, great decider, says we want to change this to English, and 49% say we want this Afrikaans. It must go with the 51%.
No, so let me give you a better example. In the school where my children go, over 90% of them are black. The medium in the school is English. The 10% of the non-vernacular speaking kids are able to feel welcome in that school and integrate and be part of the school culture and so on, because the kids speak a language, English, that they can, and that's fine, isn't it?
Well,
you have to say no. You gotta say no. You gotta say it's not fine.
No,
because our kids.
I'm saying that it's a very emotional issue, and parents will find education for their children, right?
Yes.
They will. That's a given. Right. It is the thing that you're going to protect the most.
Yes.
And all that's going to happen, really, is that we're going to see a plethora of Afrikaans private schools. Okay. And so really that's great. Yet another service that gets privatized. That's cool.
Do we see a plethora of Xhosa schools?
I don't know why. That's up to Xhosa speaking people.
Because as a Xhosa speaking person, we accept that we have to cohabit this country.
No, you don't. You just haven't created your own school. I'm saying you could argue that. You could argue that either way.
We have no inclination, Mike. We speak our language to our children in the home.
Yes.
And in the community, when we get together, we understand, Mike.
Okay, so the question is, sorry, because we're running low, is whether this is being done because it makes sense, right? Or if it's being done as revenge, or if it's being done for political point scoring. Because right now, it's starting to feel perilously close to sort of like, Berlin in 1937, right? Where you've got a minority and it's open season, right? And you've got a majority everywhere in Parliament, etc. You had a whole lot of rights that were protecting certain things before, right? That is now sort of being changed. And that's the way it looks, right? Which brings me to
Mike.
We talk about a constitutional change, aren't we?
Yeah, no, Mike.
Okay, why? Because we didn't like what it was there before.
No, Mike.
Much like with property rights, we talk about a constitutional change.
So let me ask you this question, Mike. Why is the DA and Freedom Front Plus not taking this to court?
Well, they said they would.
Why not? Aren't they doing it?
Well, because they're still trying to negotiate this thing. They took it to NEDLAC. They got what they wanted. So let's see.
No, it's in the clearinghouse. Mike, when a law in South Africa is unconstitutional, and I said I'm an institutionalist, I'm a constitutionalist. When a law is unconstitutional, the Constitutional Court is empowered to instruct the government to suspend the offending section of the legislation or wholly and send it back to Parliament. The DA is one of the most litigious organizations in South Africa, and they've done many good things that way, especially during the bad years when we, were under the thumb of a corrupt, very deeply corrupt government. I want them to exercise that right so that this thing can be adjudicated, Mike. Then we don't have an emotional conversation here. Because I feel that for me, I accept genuinely, Mike, I have no inclination to send my kids to a Xhosa school. They live in a pluralistic society. I want my kids to go to school with white kids, with Setswana-speaking kids, with Sesotho-speaking kids. I genuinely want that for my kids, okay? But if there are people who feel that that environment is threatening, then they will go and start their own schools. But I genuinely have no inclination to do so. But I just want to say, part of that national responsibility is that I accept that I can't have things going the way Xhosa people want in the school.
Okay.
I have to. My neighbor is a vendor. What must happen now?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Their kids have to feel welcome in the school.
Songezo, as we're running out of time, I just want to deal with one issue because it's something that that we feel quite strongly, and I know you're still sort of based up here in Gauteng. We've seen this tremendous decline in Gauteng.
Oh, yeah. Ooh.
Right? And now we see the Gauteng government acting outside of the government of national unity, choosing to, and I've seen the paperwork, basically betray what was signed at a provincial level. And then eventually leaving their GNU partners out. But Rise Mzansi took what I called, when your colleague Vuyiswa Ramakgopa was here in July, they invent a couple of bullshit positions and give her one. And now there's corruption in that particular portfolio.
Which she has exposed and published.
Yes.
Okay.
Will somebody be going to jail? Will you be speaking to your premier?
Mike, so I can't speak to the premier,
right?
Personally, right?
Because when she was here, I said it's a matter of time before this corruption.
Can I correct a bit of unintentional misinformation? Do you know what percentage of the whole agri sector Gauteng has nationally? Hey, listen, don't sniff at it, Mike. It's around 12%.
Okay.
Right? So it's not a bullshit portfolio. Yes. It's a serious portfolio, right? You've got agri-technology companies and here. So that's a very important portfolio in that sense. Secondly, if you'd had a different MEC, you didn't read that story in the Sunday Times to be an expose by the Sunday Times because they found out. This was published by Vuyiswa.
Right.
She exposed it. You and I are now able to talk about it. Did that used to happen before? No. Right. Now, we must just be careful not to make assumptions. And this is where I think some people, and I'm not referring to you, some people, our supporters.
I'm firmly in the some people category.
Some of our supporters appeared to believe that the DA would be able to resist the pull of corruption, but we wouldn't. Here's the proof. Right? We're all talking about this now. There is an independent investigation going on. There is likely to be, there is going to be recovery of those assets, criminal charges and so on. Right? Which was never going to happen. But this, we said, it's time for new leaders. We must expose this when we see it. We must let the people know what's going on. So I would think on that score, Mike, she's done exactly what we promised. I am not sure that the same MEC who had bought those things would have exposed it.
Yep. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there is a new wind blowing through our politics and is sitting here to my left, and that is Razim Zanzi, doing a really honest job wherever they are represented, and nobody's doing this better than Songezo Zibi as head of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts in Parliament, and just generally using some common sense thinking in Parliament, and he should be supported. The other people that should be supported is Pace Car Rental. They keep us going. And, you love the State of the Nation, so I'm sure you've subscribed by now. But Songezo, thank you so much. It's always great to speak to you.
Always, Mike.
And to everybody that joined us today, we'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Thank you.